With the organizational assessment report, I'm going to invite Dr. Brittany Lewis and her team but to provide some context. There was an RFP that was issued before I started around doing an organizational assessment of the Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Department. And I met with Dr. Lewis when I first started and really wanting to understand what some of my predecessors had went through, some learning lessons, as well as, because we are an internal-facing department, how can we work better with other city departments throughout the organization? And with that, I would like to invite Dr. Brittany Lewis and her team up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, for joining us.
Of course. Yeah. Take a breath, Prince. Wow. That was a lot. I'm Dr. Brittany Lewis, CEO of Research in Action. I'm joined here with my colleagues Socorro and Emma, and we are honored to share with you a bit about the work that we did in partnership with the RIB department. All right, this is what we're using here. All right, I've already introduced ourselves. For those that do not know, Research in Action is a community engaged action research company that focuses on recentering the voices of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks into research. We take a different approach to research. We want to disrupt the traditional research process by ensuring that community members frame the research questions, the strategies, and the tools in the context of this project. The new RIB department was really reimagining itself, hiring on new folks, and making sense of who they were. And we really wanted to work with them and help them do that in an authentic way, as well as take a look at what community members have been saying in the past and the present about what they would desire out of the city and the department itself. So that is who we are. We have 3 values at Research in Action. It's about actionable research. We do not want to produce things that sit on journal repositories or for college classrooms to mesmerize. We want to move city and state and county policy, and we have done that in many of our projects. It's about a community-led process. Our community members are our experts, and we should treat them that way. And racial justice. We don't usually say racial equity, don't knock folks that do. We want to move past acknowledgement toward reparative solutions. All right, that is just me repeating myself. The goals of the project, as Prince noted, it was to generate a historical narrative that comprehensively lays out the last decade of racial equity work at the city of Minneapolis, and to conduct a survey of city leaders across departments to glean insights into their expectations, perspectives, and goals for collaborating with the RIB department. Something I will note is that when we originally applied for the RFP and then connected with Prince as the new leader of that department, it was very clear that the original RFP asked someone to do an assessment of past work that most of the RIB department were actually present for. So we had to reimagine what a real assessment should be and what would actually be helpful for the city and the department itself as they're reimagining who they were. Okay, and I'll pass it over to Socorro.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Lewis. So first, we are going to look at the complex journey that led to the establishment of our current Racial Equity and Inclusion and Belonging Department. This history is filled with moments of tensions and contentions, which are much like what's been documented for decades around racial equity work. Methodologies that we used. So why a historical narrative? Through interviews and collection of public materials or documents provided by the REIB department, we were able to piece together a detailed timeline. Our timeline began in 2004 when much of the work on equity lay in the Department of Human Rights and goes throughout until the appointment of Prince and Corbett and Michelle Jackson, who are the current leaders of REIB. To understand REIB's current position, we really need context from its history, revealing patterns, challenges, and systemic issues beyond quick fixes. This historical insight empowered and is empowering the REIB department to approach racial equity strategically, fostering sustainability and long-term progress. So we conducted interviews with people who were directly involved or impacted by these tensions, and this helped us uncover perspectives and experiences that may not be fully documented but are very crucial for comprehensive historical narrative. These interviews allowed us to capture personal insights, identify multiple moments of resilience, and even understand both the obstacles and small victories that have shaped the REIB department's journey. By filling in these gaps, we aimed to create a more nuanced and accurate account that reflects the lived experiences of those who navigated these challenges, providing a stronger foundation for current and future racial equity work. Listed here and on the slides, our key informants that we interviewed were Velma Corbel, City of Minneapolis City Rights Director from 2010 to 2020, and Joy Marsh, leader of the City Council, or the city's racial equity work from 2015 to 2021. Andrea Jenkins, Minneapolis City Council member, 2017 to present, and council president from 2022 to 2024. And Taisha Green, first department lead of the REIB department, 2022 to 2023. So now we bring you all to our key tensions and contentions, an overview of our findings from the historical narrative. The research done to put this historical narrative together highlights 5 key tensions and contentions throughout the history of the REIB's department's formation. Certain reoccurring tensions have shaped its trajectory. These are not isolated incidences, as they reflect deeper struggles that impact racial equity work at a structural level. Our first tension: who decides where racial equity work lives? One significant tension had been over who controls racial equity work within the city. This had led to ongoing debates on where the REIB department should live within the city's organizational structure, raising questions about ownership, influence, and accountability. The second, how does the city fund racial equity work? Another point of contention had been around funding, with racial equity work often placed at the margins of budget priorities. Securing stable funding has been an uphill battle. Limited resources hinder the department's ability to plan long-term and can create tension within other city departments. Third, what level of leadership makes sense for racial equity work? The push for departmental status reflects a broader tension about the level of visibility and authority that racial equity work should have. Without departmental recognition, the REIB department risks being perceived as an advisory body rather than a core city function, which impacts its influence. Fourth, workplace climate and staff turnover. The high rate of staff turnover is another major tension, often a result of burnout, frustration, and lack of support. This disrupts continuity, reduces morale, and slows down the department's progress. And finally, who controls the REIB department budget? Control over the budget has been a more contentious issue. Without budgetary autonomy, the department struggles to respond flexibly to new challenges, which reinforces its dependency on other entities for approval and funding. Overall, these tensions are not just logistical challenges, they reflect deep-rooted systemic issues. Addressing them requires not only policy adjustments, but a cultural shift in how the city values and supports racial equity work. Now I'm going to pass it over to Emma, who's going to talk about the City Leader Survey.
Thank you, Socorro. And now I will walk us through the layout of the survey of city leaders and then some of the key learnings that we have. So on April 9th, beginning of April, the REIB department sent out a survey that RIA co-designed with the current REIB team. And the survey stayed open for a duration of 2 weeks. And by the end of the 2 weeks, 46 city leaders completed the survey. And one thing to notice is that when we are outing our survey, it was on the platform of Qualtrics and it was collected anonymous. And until this day, it was still stayed anonymous. So more on the survey itself, the questions were designed to assess the nature of other city departments' collaborative experiences with and their needs for the RAB department. And so next step for the survey layout, based on the purpose of the survey, we created 4 sections in the survey. And section 1 being working with the RAB department, in which we probe into respondents' past and present experience working with the department. Section 2 being key terms for racial equity, inclusion, and belonging. And these key terms are identified by the RAB team to be central to their day-to-day work. Section 3 being the RAB departmental values and strategies, behaviors to apply them within the survey respondents' departments. And then the last section is demographics of all the survey respondents. And then upcoming, I'm going to show some key demographics from all the survey respondents. So here we can see that for roles in the city, we see that most of the respondents are department leader or director. We do have 1 member of the mayor's leadership team taking a survey, some equity team member, a few prefer not to say, and a few identify as others, staff in the city. And then next character for race, most of the survey respondents were white. While we also have some Asian, African American or Black, Indigenous folks. Well, there's also a few prefer not to say or identify themselves. And the next step for gender identity, most of our survey respondents identified as cisgender women, while slightly fewer but also quite some cisgender men, while others identify as agender, gender non-confirming, unsure how to describe self, prefer not to say, or prefer to self-describe. So these are the key demographics that we collected, and now I'm going to take us into the survey analysis. So the key thing we wanted to point out here today is the cross-sectional analysis, by which we mean that although the first 3 sections of the survey are kind of asking different questions for different purposes, these 3 themes prevailed across all of the sections. So the first one we noticed is a discomfort with directly the use or indirectly suggesting the use of the term white supremacy. And the second one, we noticed that folks who shared in the survey that there's skepticism about whether the words will actually be turned into action by the city leaders. And the last thing we notice is a sentiment that the city needs to give RAB time to rebuild and reset, given the tumultuous history of its predecessors. So these are the themes we notice across the survey. And then now, from taking into learnings from the historical narrative that Sakura walked us through and the survey learnings I just shared, I'd like to make some recommendations for the RAB department, but also the city to further to the next step of the racial equity work. So these recommendations, although we identify them out one by one, they're interactive with each other, and some of them could be positively impacted by the implementation of one another. So starting the first one, we recommend the RAB department to introduce new trainings that fits the needs of departments across the city. And that particularly will be around core values, definitions, terminology, and how they apply to keep implementing changes that foster racial equity. And next step, we recommend to refine existing definitions for key terms and streamline them across the city. This one comes from, we noticed that over 1/3 of the survey respondents actually have different interpretation of the key terms that the current RAB department identified as central to their day-to-day work. So to be effective, we recommend the RAB department to clarify these key terms and also demonstrate how to integrate these terms into department practices, goals, and operations. So next step, we recommend to reintroduce the RAB department within the city with updated informational materials, in-person presentations, and gatherings. This reintroduction should include examples and possibly case studies that illustrate how RAB can support department's racial equity goals. And the next step, we recommend to solidify the RAB department's role as an internal consultant for city departments to develop their departmental racial equity policies, matrix, and strategic planning. From the survey, we see that over 60% of the survey respondents who are department leads are looking to RIB for consultation on their expertise in the area. So moving forward, we think that RIB department should offer clearly defined options for city departments to build partnerships, and also giving some examples of how the positive collaboration and partnership could lead to outcomes, and that could have be emerged from the different options that the department could provide. So going forward with the recommendation, we have increased staff buy-in, which we have as a recommendation, but also could be a positive outcome of the reintroduction of the RIB department. So by increasing staff buy-in for RIB, we recommend the RIB department to create an engagement strategy and identify staffs to serve as a point of contact for the RIB department. And next step, we recommend to nurture RIB department's relationship with city leaders by collaborating directly with city leaders on shared agreements for dealing with conflicts and streamlining communication and documentation practices to avoid miscommunications and misalignments between RIB and city initiatives. And the next one, we recommend both the RIB department and the city to continue supporting racial healing and reconciliation by directly collaborating with the community, and particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, and Latin folks within the city of Minneapolis staff to initiate healing and repair efforts to move forward. And also outlining a concrete plan to revisit the truth and reconciliation work and take action to realize this vision of healing and transformation. We also recognize that the work of racial healing and reconciliation is not something that could be accomplished in a 5 or 10-year plan. It is an ongoing process, so that this recommendation makes it more important to focus on that. And lastly, we recommend to focus on foster a positive work culture within the city. This recommendation was actually directly brought up by several of the survey respondents themselves. And the need is also reflected in the 4 historical interviews that we did with our key informants. So it is also congruent with the work that's already being carried out currently by the RIB department and provides additional options and consideration for culture change. So that is the presentation from the RIA team. And we also want to thank you for your time listening to this presentation. Also, thanks to Prince and Michelle for their support throughout this project.
Thank you so much. I'm looking to see if there's anyone in queue for questions, comments. There we go, Vice Chair Palmisano.
Hi, I'll hopefully just start some comments and questions. First, I want to say I really like how you framed these initial project goals. I think that's really innovative, and it's really important to help us create an outside look into our work that's valuable for us. Thank you for doing that. I couldn't agree more that those are the right and most productive goals to study. I also really liked your framing of key tensions and contentions, I think is how it said. That's also pretty innovative in terms of study, I've got to admit. I'm curious, is what you mentioned about how REIB sits within the organization and the tension and contentions with that, do you think that's more than most other beginning departments that you've seen in other realms of study you've had, or do you see that as being, I guess what I'm asking is how much of that is the product of being an extremely small startup department within a city where there are some very large departments, and what kinds of things are unique to them? And do you think that those things could be solved with one of the things you learned out of the survey, which is the time to rebuild that you pointed out?
Yep. I have a yes and answer to that. So I think the time to rebuild is important. However, we'd be remiss to not mention that in the creation of the division and the evolution of the division to a department, there were a number of things going on in the world that heavily influenced how division leadership in the department was even created. And it's attached to those things, and it's outlined in our report. So there is the realities of racial equity work as a national global conversation. There's the realities of racial equity work in the city of Minneapolis under very contentious political and social contexts, and how that influenced how leaders throughout its history were able to show up and or felt they were able to ask for the things that they needed. So I'm saying yes, and time is needed to rebuild.
Thank you. I appreciate these insights. My other curiosity was about in that survey. I don't recall getting a survey thing. I don't think you interviewed elected people. But do you have a sense of the percentage completion rate? Like, do you feel like you got a high completion rate from those that you asked to do the survey?
Yes, thank you, Chair Wansley, Vice Chair Palmisano. I want to take a step back to your previous question real quick. I think it's also important to note that the Division of Racial Equity originally started in the Civil Rights Department and then was moved as a division into the City Coordinator's Office, and now a new department. So even with the historical context, and also there was a whole previous different government structure. So going through all of that into where we're at now, like I think also plays a piece into that. And with regards to the survey, once we got the survey, I really wanted to know because we're working internally and moving forward in the future, I really wanted to know, we really wanted to know how can we work better with other departments, so getting their feedback. Because one of the principles around moving race equity work inside of government is listening to those who are most impacted by the decisions that are being made. So the survey went out to department directors. I believe I sent it out to direct reports of department directors. I sent it out through to all of the council members, through ward offices. I was meeting with equity team members, and we sent the survey out around March, and I think I was probably about 4 or 5 months in, like at that point in time as well. So it went through a broad network. I don't know exactly how many people, but I do think that roughly 34 people is a pretty good number.
I thought it was 57, but you're probably right.
Do you know the 46?
46.
responded.
46.
Okay.
I think there was a total number of department leaders we were aiming to get.
Okay.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
Madam Chair, would it be possible to read that into the microphone? Just that the captioners catch that.
Oh,
That 46 people responded to the survey? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you for those questions. I also had follow-up questions regarding just somewhat of the lack of diverse representation, and seeing that it was largely completed by, it seemed, cis white men and white women employees, and how that correlated with some of the recommendations in terms of what stuck out for me was like the discomfort with the use of the word white supremacy, which is a key component of discussing racial conditions. And I know also naming the political contentions that we're dealing with nationwide with the attack on DEI or all things dealing with race, there has been this demonization of the word around or the word white supremacy in itself. And I was nervous of, is that sentiment shared amongst our own employees, where we can't talk about not only white supremacy, but in terms of how it is not only systematically or the systemic origin of the word, and how it is embedded in institutions like the one you work in every single day. And so it was good to see the correlation of that then be, you know, it sounds like introducing new definitions and having to streamline it, but I also felt that seemed to correlate, again, with who took the survey in itself and centering largely not the ones who's been most vocal about the racism that has happened at the city of Minneapolis, both internally and externally amongst our residents who've experienced it too. So I just wanted to get a sense too of how we landed at that representation.
So what I want to say, and I appreciate you naming this, I actually feel like who ended up filling out the survey was a good thing. Because usually those voices aren't sharing and being open about what they really think or feel and feel comfortable doing so. I think deeper work is needed. I think hearing more voices is important, but I think it helps to hear what you just said. There's a deep correlation between how the majority white staff that filled this out feel about talking about white supremacy. And that showed up in this survey. I think that's a deep learning for the council and the city to figure out, what do we do with that information? How might we expand the survey and get more voices, but with who actually filled it out? What did that confirm for certain people or make true for others? So I heed your point, and I see value in the fact that there is an isolated population that chose to speak up about their comfort level, and it tells us something.
Yeah, thank you for framing it. I think in that way, I think, at least I remember my time where your informants who were here in dealing with the fallout of the department, it often felt like those voices were the most loudest anyways. So, yeah, it's good to see that it was vocal in this space too of everyone was having some challenge in naming racism. But it was very loud. It was on full display during that time when we were talking about appointments and the ousting of certain, not only directors, but the way in which they left.
Yes.
And their framing and the character assassinations. The racism was on full display. But yeah, thank you for framing that point. Yeah.
And might I add that the fact that you had a low percentage of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks fill this out is probably directly correlated to a time where they spoke loud and nothing happened.
Thank you. I see Council Member Ellison.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, and your team for being here. I was also glad to see the acknowledgement of the tensions and contentions, and which sometimes at the city feels like stronger language than we're willing to use, but it even still, given the history of this work, it almost feels a little sanitized. I don't say that as a criticism, but like, I think for me, I'm really trying to understand what are the core dysfunction with this work, and because it wasn't just about leadership turning over, right? And it wasn't even just about regular staff turnover, even high staff turnover. I mean, we saw that there were full bodies of people who were doing this work in whatever iteration over time, and we just saw full implosions happen twice. And even now, you know, not that I know what's going on in the day-to-day, but I'm hearing still high turnover today, right? I'm a bit of a skeptic, right? And like, just as a pure skeptic, like, you know, without even speaking to, you know, Director Corbett, you know, what I know of you, I think you're doing your, you know, your best work. But as a pure skeptic, I'm looking at the trend, zooming out, looking at the trend, and I'm wondering, is there anything that the department can do to stop the dysfunction, or is the administration, the collective we as an institution, just sort of rotating black faces until we get one that's willing to play ball? That's you know, that is like, that's how, as a skeptic, not speaking to any individual, as a skeptic, that's how my mind works. And so I know that there are people who are outside of the institution looking in and kind of being like, yeah, when it looks like it's working, can we even trust that? And I don't know, I guess it's not really a question, but it's just sort of a way that I'm reviewing the history of the department, you know, which I feel like I was here for a lot of, and then, you know, reflecting, I think, some of what I've heard from people who used to work in the department, who used to work in previous iterations of the department, to people who have left, you know, in that first draft, in that second draft, and even more recently. It's hard to know at what point can we trust that the work is getting done adequately, you know, with efficacy, et cetera.
I see Director Corbett, and I just also want to say amen to that rotating black faces comment. Director Corbett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wansley, Councilmember Ellison. To that, we've been doing a lot of things this year that really has been out of scope of the ordinance, right? So that's we have an ordinance, that is the policy for what it is that we should be doing, what it is that that has been scripted for us to do. The more we're doing things out of scope, the more we're not going to be able to do the things that needs to happen within that ordinance to be able to get to the real culture change that needs to happen. And so when I started in this position, recognizing it was September last year, my thing for my team this year was, okay, let's try to get as many wins and execute on many things that we're budgeted for in 2024. And in 2025, we really need to reframe and reorganize our department so that we are doing what is within that ordinance. And the more we are aligning with what's in the ordinance, the more I believe that we will see the change happen. And also, Chair Wanza, we also have Tawana Black from Center for Economic Inclusion with the Race Equity Dividends Index, so just wanted to note that as well.
Yeah, I figured we would wrap up questions around this portion and then segue to the remaining parts of your presentation. And I see Councilmember Vita. But first, I want to make sure, was your comment addressed? Okay.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, and your team for this presentation. I wanted to just briefly say thanks for the goals. My struggle with this department has always been, what are we doing? Like, what are the goals? How do I translate this department to residents in Ward 4? That could be, we're creating an environment for staff to come out and be better in community, whatever it is. It's just always been that. And then my second struggle has been, it's always felt like the shift in leadership in the department shifts the goals or lack of goals, right? Like you get individuals in and it seems like it becomes what they think race equity should be and not really this, this slide you have shows, here are some goals. This is what we're trying to accomplish here. Like this, people can get behind that. But it's kind of felt like over my few years of being here that it's been individuals pick a topic and that's their personal preference to focus on and things kind of shift instead of like this cohesive goal setting for a department. We're going to work within the city departments. This year I had a group that works on race equity and building up staff, internal kind of work group, and they were talking about like how they need to be lifted up and some policies they want to see passed around time they get to spend on the issues and things. And my first question to them was, are you engaged in race equity? Like, how is that department helping? And they were like, no. And I'm like, that's your first stop, right? Like, that's what this department is for. So it was a little odd for me to hear that that wasn't their first course of action. So I do like the idea of resetting and figuring out like how race equity gets reintroduced to the entire city of Minneapolis. And maybe that's our opportunity to show people, if you are working on a subcommittee or something in the department, like this is how you activate this department. This is how you partner with people in here. But more than anything, I wanted to thank you and your team for kind of putting it in perspective for me and showing me that there could be an opportunity for some goals that we can work on as a council. Like I'm just that kind of person where I need to see it. I'm not always the visionary, but I'm always the person who can accomplish whatever it is we need to accomplish. So thank you for having the vision and figuring out, doing the work to collect the information to figure out what it is people would like to see happen and giving us a playbook of what can happen. Thank you.
Thank you, all council members, for hearing us today.
Thank you. And then we have one last question from Council Vice President Chuck High.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Lewis and the Research and Action team, thank you for coming in to present your work to us. I think Director Corbett sent us the larger report that you completed for the city of Minneapolis earlier this year. I think back in August, I had a chance to read over that. I think it's incredibly thorough and would recommend to all members of the council to review that, just to see the findings in particular from the four key leaders that you engaged, and how much those inform the recommendations, the key contentions that you lift up as well. So I think something that I'm hearing a decent amount of agreement on here with you, Director Corbett, is the need to, and as evidenced in this report and the findings that you presented today, the need to shift to REIB, Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Department being an internal services department, like internal focused, looking specifically at the enterprise. And what I appreciate about your earlier comments, Director, were just how you're looking at that sort of shift with the new budget year coming up. So, you know, I think there's a tremendous amount of external facing work, community facing work that the department currently does, and it's you know, those are legacies from when the division was initially created. So the two things that come to mind for me would be, in particular, the LGBTQ plus equity work, the trans equity work, and then the truth and reconciliation work. Those are two external facing things. They're both still a part of your budget in 2025. So I'm wondering, how are you thinking about the shift to an internal facing department that really gets time to, you know, figure out what their lane of work is, your lane of work is, and how do you reconcile that with your 2025 budget not entirely reflecting that vision yet?
Thank you, Chair Wansley, Council Vice President Chuck Tai. With that being internally focused, it's having the relationships with other departments to be able to really think about some of the external work that we're doing and where best does it sit within the organization, considering there were a few departments that are within the current structure that was not there before. One of the things with the truth, healing, and reconciliation work, because that body of work is like really a strong proponent of like race equity work with the racial repair harm model that we do have, I do have a program manager that is currently working on that. With respect to the LGBTQIA plus equity work, like our race equity framework that we are developing will have that intersectional lens to it. And when we say intersectional lens, so that we are, yes, leading with the race, but not being exclusionary of other people's identity, so that when we're building out the framework that has the definitions where we're talking about what is gender equity, what is gender identity equity, what is LGBTQ equity, so that all of those definitions are built in the framework so that the whole enterprise is moving with the same shared knowledge.
So in short, what I'm hearing you say is work is ongoing to figure out how to transition external facing work to appropriate departments.
Correct.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. I believe that is everyone in queue. Thank you again, Dr. Lewis and team. And yeah, please